So welcome everyone to Breaking into UX, redesigning your UX resume and portfolio. And these are some of the topics that we're going to be covering in today's session. So let's dive into UX resume writing tips. UX layout tips to begin with. One thing to consider is to really consider a one-column layout when you start to build and design your UX resume template. The reason I really recommend a one-column layout is because it's the easiest layout that's going to be able to bypass ATS systems at these different companies so that a human can actually eventually get to your resume rather than just AI or a robot looking at your resume. And so through our A/B testing, we have found that one-column resumes tend to be more easily scannable by the ATS and easier to parse. So a lot of systems will scan your resume as well and then parse that information into different chunks. And so for whatever reason, the two-column approach, which a lot of folks use and it's popular in the design community, it's harder for these systems to parse that. And your information might get scrambled if you're using more of a two-column system. So again, highly recommend the one-column approach. I like to build and design my resume in a simple Word document. The one-column approach also helps me have less of a sloppy layout. When you're designing for a two-column resume, sometimes there might be misalignments in paragraphs or sections, and that can appear as sloppy. But with a Word document, you're always guaranteed that you're going to have great alignment in the way that things are formatted. And of course, the biggest no-no is typos and misspelling. So try not to, do a word check. Design, when I used to try and design my resume in Figma or FigJam, I would always have typos, but Word doc has always served me as my most successful resumes. So I would kind of lean away from designing in Figma and designing in FigJam. I know we're all designers. I know we enjoy adding color and style to what we do, but the resume should look pretty boring. It should just be cleanly formatted. And my most successful resumes have been Word doc resumes rather than Figma resumes. So that brings me to that next tip is to not include any graphics. So we don't want you to include logos, photos, or colors in your resumes. These are just overly designed elements and they make it harder for your resume to pass through the ATS system. Keep it simple, black and white typography, create it in Google Docs, Word if you really want to. Again, ensure easy scannability, right? Be able to very quickly look at headers, subheaders, and bullet points. And make sure that each job description and project description is easy to scan, and each section in your resume is easy to scan as well. I like to stick to using sans serif typefaces like Helvetica or Lato. I try to stay away from for some reason it paused. Weird. Let me reshare. So yeah, I just prefer to, use more sans serif typefaces and no color preferably. But if you would like to use one color, you can. But I just prefer to keep it really simple. Save that creativity that you're having for your UX portfolio instead. And again, try not to write paragraphs in your resume, but try to, really come up with bullet points. So 1-line or 2-line bullet points are really ideal for scannability. And next we can get into more of the layout of a resume. I like to go right into experience. So I like to prioritize my work experience at the top of the page. I sometimes like to turn work experience into project work as well. So if you wanted to, frame your project experience as experience, I think that's a good way to frame it and thereby focus your UX projects up top on your resume so that the recruiter doesn't have to go scanning and looking for your UX work. And companies are most interested in seeing relevant real world work experience. And we'll talk about this later on, but the storytelling plays a huge role in whether a recruiter is excited about your resume. So really talking about those transferable skill sets in your real world work experience is really crucial. And I also like to include all my contact information in a header section for my resume. So I like to link my LinkedIn, my portfolio with a password at the top of the page, and then include my email and phone number. No need to include an address. And I highlight my education section at the very bottom of the resume. So again, when we're talking about these sections, we want to highlight really relevant skills to the job at the bottom. So I like to deprioritize the skills section all the way to the bottom after education. And that's kind of my catch-all for terminology I might not have used in my actual descriptions themselves. And in my key skills section, I like to include software as well. So I like to include design and tech software like Figma, Adobe Creative Suite, Microsoft Office, Google Suite, Jira, and Trello. And I know a lot of folks like to add objective sessions and introduction sections. I think that's a waste of time. I personally don't believe in adding those. I don't think an objective really makes sense. I think you can add something like an objective statement at the top of your UX portfolio to make things more personalized. But I think the UX resume document should be very straight and to the point and really showcase your expertise. It's really in how you're framing the story in your bullet points that will lead the hiring manager to choose you or not choose you. And we're going to talk about that more in the AI-powered job search section of our talk today on how to frame that story. So with the UX storytelling, we really, again, need to prioritize the information that is most relevant to recruiters and hiring managers, which means our work experience, our project examples, especially relevant to the job that we're applying for. So if you're applying to a UX role in healthcare, then prioritize and highlight all your healthcare projects up top at the top of your resume. The biggest piece of advice I have for folks, and I've worked with a lot of folks in resume writing sessions as well, is everyone gets very attached to all of their work experience, but you have to be almost a ruthless editor in your own work narrative. So really, anything that's older than, I would say, 5 years, feel free to just cut it and eliminate it, right? Rewrite older work experience and project descriptions to suit the terminology used today in the UX field. But if you have 20 years of experience, there's no need to include all of those 20 years of work experience. I would only highlight the most recent 5 to maybe 10 years of experience, depending on the role that you want to go for. If you're going for more mid to senior level roles, highlight these last 5 years. If you're going for lead to management roles, highlight 10 years. But it really depends on what you're going for. And again, the biggest thing is just to remove that irrelevant information and only include the information that is relevant to that job that you're applying for. If it's not relevant and it's in your resume, it's going to be used against you and work against you, so just remove it. Or find a way to reframe it in terms of UX skills and methodologies. And another really key element that really helps certain resumes stand out from others is to showcase impactful KPIs or key performance indicators. So showcase your impact on the project at hand in terms of the revenue, conversion rates, time saved, costs reduced, etc. But talk to you can even put metrics on the number of folks you talked to or interviewed, the amount of time it took you to complete a design sprint or design process, and you can talk about the number of people you collaborated on or how many people you managed and mentored on the job. So not every metric has to be a project impact metric. You can also just talk about, the number of clients you served in a month or in a year, the amount of time you saved the team per month, per week. Things like that. And so really start to dig into your experience to see how you optimize certain metrics. And of course, when I say use the UX terminology for that job, one example is if you, for example, worked in customer service, then describe your calls as customer interviews or user interviews rather than, customer service interviews, right? So there's ways you can really highlight transferable skills by tweaking the language in your existing job descriptions so that it's more suited to the UX industry. If you worked as an admin, then describe how you optimized internal processes as service design. And again, this is not a one and done thing, right? the biggest mistake I see a lot of folks who are breaking into UX make is that they have one UX resume where they call themselves a UX designer and a UX researcher. No, that's a big no-no. Even if you want to go for both career paths, you should have one hyper-specific UX researcher resume and one hyper-specific UX designer resume. So if you're applying to multiple UX career paths, which there's no shame in that, it's good to create a version of your UX resume for each career path. So please do not create those generalist resumes. Generalist resumes, will always be thrown in the trash bin in comparison to specialist resumes that showcase more relevant expertise, right? So really take that time to build multiple resumes for each career path and then constantly A/B test those resumes as well, which are really crucial. When it comes to the storytelling, it's also about how you frame what you frame. So again, really use action-oriented language. Start every sentence with a verb: collaborated, led, prototyped, analyzed. That really gets to the point and cuts the fluff. Use really simple language. If you have a child at home, can your fifth grader or third grader read this resume and understand what you do? Most speechwriters for US presidents actually try to use the language of fifth graders so that fifth graders can understand the language of presidents. So if it's good enough for US presidents, it should be good enough for your UX resume. Do not write and use overly complex or flowery language. Keep it simple while including the UX terminology as well. And again, the biggest impact you can have in your storytelling is to show and not tell. So describe the impact you have on a project in a UX leadership section rather than just telling people what you did on a day-to-day basis. Impact is much more interesting and helps you stand out from the crowd. So I'm just going to go back here. I guess I didn't do it here, but for a lot of the folks I work for, I like to put a UX leadership section where I summarize their entire work at that company and I add in a couple of KPIs and then I go into specific projects that they did. And so you can play around with having that leadership section really tell the story of the impact that you have before you go into specific projects and specific types of work. And again, the biggest way you can realize whether your resume is a success or failure is by A/B testing it. So it's important. What I like to do is create a generalist resume for each career path. So I might have a product designer resume. I might have a UX researcher resume. I might start to put those out, and those are my generalist resumes. When I apply for each job, I'm actually tailoring that resume to each job description I'm applying to using ChatGPT a lot of the time to streamline the process. And so then I'm having, my generalist resumes for each career path, but also all these additional versions of resumes I've created to tailor to very specific companies and very specific roles. And that A/B testing is going to really help you because you might find that a resume you wrote for your application to Visa as a company ends up being a really strong resume, and you can start to use that as your baseline resume once you see that that is getting you the most success. And so you keep improving your baseline resume from there as you keep A/B testing these different versions. I also recommend A/B testing the lengths of your resume. If you're going for more mid to senior level roles, I would recommend a 2 to 3 pager resume. If you're, at the entry level, definitely a 1 to 2 pager is fine, but play around with the length of your resume. Really see if you can just, a few folks came to my design systems talk previous to this. There's long form content and there's short form content, and right, different people have different preferences. So don't feel like your resume just has to be 1 page. Play around with both long form and short form content resumes. And the most important thing is once you're doing all this A/B testing, your baseline is changing, right? Over time, as you're applying to different jobs, you might have a more successful version of your resume. And the moment you land on that more successful version of your resume, your LinkedIn profile needs to match that resume. So whatever your most successful resume is, really make sure that your LinkedIn profile matches that resume. Word for word, all the descriptions, all the titles need to match that resume. So if you're going for multiple career paths, I always tell folks who come to our 7-month MBA program, Design MBA program, is that, initially they might not be sure what UX career path they want. So they might be applying to UX designer roles, product designer roles, UX researcher roles, and their LinkedIn might not be very optimized. As they apply, they might realize that they're getting more callbacks for one specific career, in which case then they start to tailor and focus their LinkedIn to be like their UX researcher resume, because that's where they're getting the most traction. And then as they keep A/B testing the UX researcher resumes, they might find that a long form UX researcher resume specific to highlighting their healthcare expertise is the one that's getting them the most traction. And they start to become more and more focused with their profile. So I really hope that with this A/B testing, it helps you to focus rather than become more general and diverge. The biggest mistake a lot of career changers make is being too general and being too much of a generalist. So all this testing should help you focus your profiles. And remember that your resume, portfolio, and LinkedIn should read the same. A lot of times it's a red flag to me when I see someone's LinkedIn profile look one type of way and have certain job descriptions, but their resume looks completely different and only has UX project work, and then their portfolio has completely different work. And they look like three different people across these three different deliverables. So make sure you're presenting one persona or one person of who you are in this UX space across all your three profiles or deliverables. So with that, we're going to dive into more of the UX portfolio tips. I'm just going to take a second to pause here. So I see a couple of questions. Is it important within the resume to try and describe what the company does or what the product does that you've worked on at a high level? That's a really good question, Rachel. Yes, I would say in the UX leadership section, that's a great place to add that. Because your job in that first section or those first couple of lines when you describe your work experience is to educate the recruiter on at a high level what the company does and at a high level what your impact was at the company. And then you can dive into actions and tasks and deliverables, but they have to understand your high level, what the company does and what the impact was first and foremost. So I always prioritize my KPIs first and foremost. If we worked on UX design volunteer projects, do we need to specify what these are, that these were volunteer opportunities on the resume? I don't think so. I think I see the job search as being a tease, right? Think about the job interview as being a first date. Similar to dating, when we see people on a profile, like a dating profile, they're only presenting the best versions of themselves, right? They're definitely not presenting all their flaws and all their vulnerabilities and all their fears. And so the same thing is true for the resume. The resume, the LinkedIn, and the portfolio are all your dating profile when you're trying to date this company or multiple companies. So you're putting your best foot forward. You don't need to mention that it was a volunteer opportunity, and you need to learn how to be a tease. So when you're on your first date, you're not going to give away, just like the first interview, you're not going to give away all of the information about the specifics of everything that you did. So I say that you should only tell someone the relevant information if they ask. And if they don't ask, there's no need to tell. Don't ask, don't tell. Be a tease, be a tease. Okay, so we're going to get into what is the appropriate way to market your work while respecting the confidentiality of the project? That is a really good question. I would say you should still talk about high-level impact metrics in your resume. Whether or not you put it on your LinkedIn profile is debatable depending on the type of metric you're describing, but I think it's completely fine to put that in your resume because the resume is something only the recruiter and the hiring manager will look at. You can also password protect your portfolio work so that not anyone can just go into your portfolio piece, but then you'd be able to put inside some of the more sensitive information or metric information in the portfolio piece as well. I would say the general rule of thumb is most managers at companies leave this up to the designer's discretion. So use your discretion on how much or how little you want to say. Because there's no real rule of thumb, and unless I really look at that project firsthand, I can't really give more specific feedback. But with that, that's actually a great segue into the UX portfolio section and some tips for how to create a UX portfolio. So what I really recommend is using a UX portfolio template from a website builder like Squarespace or Wix. I think these are really easy to use because they're basically done for you UX portfolio templates that you can modify. So you can spend the time focusing on the actual content of your project work. I really do not recommend wasting your time coding your own website unless you're applying for UX engineering jobs or you're doing some sort of engineering kind of capacity work. If you're going for purely UX design, product design, or research roles, we're not going to be coders. There's no need to code your own website. What I do recommend is staying away from other UX portfolio builders like Notion and Behance. And I think this piece of advice might be controversial because I know a lot of designers, especially beginners and career changers, like to use Notion and Behance a lot. But think of the recruiter's tech skill level, right? But just because you're a UX designer and you are highly skilled in the tech world doesn't mean that a recruiter or administrator or even a project manager is going to have the skill set and the same level of technicality that you have. And so I just think that a website is just the most easily accessible piece of information, right? A person just has to click a link and then they're there. Sometimes Notion can get a little bit complicated with where you have to click to go to all the different projects. And Behance can get a little complicated because you only see one case study at a time, or you don't get to see some sort of home page. So you really want the user experience of the recruiter and the hiring manager and the project managers to be super simplified. They should be able to click into a home page in your portfolio. At the top, they should be able to see right here a description of who you are and maybe a cover photo. And then they should be able to scroll down and they should be able to see 3 to 5 case studies that you did that, you know, are really highlighted and relevant to the work that you're applying for. If they click into a case study, they should go into a case study page. And as they scroll down, they should get to a view next case study button so that they can just basically scroll through all your 3 to 5 case studies in one shot and in a couple of minutes, right? A recruiter might spend about 1 minute looking at your resume and maybe 2 minutes looking at your case studies. They're not going to read it in detail, so your portfolio needs to be very easily scannable to a recruiter, and just let them browse through the whole 3 to 5 case studies really fast. So really ensure that user experience provides that simplicity. Once you get to the hiring manager interview, that's the person who's going to be doing more due diligence and actually spending time to look at your portfolio in more detail. But again, even the hiring manager is probably going to spend 5 to 10 minutes on your portfolio. So really design for scannability and ease of use rather than making this recruiter or hiring manager click around all over the place. And I would say now that we've understood the structure of the portfolio, when we actually get into building that homepage, what does the structure of that homepage need to look like? So again, I really recommend presenting about 3 to 5 portfolio case studies on your homepage. Again, your homepage should contain 3 to 5 image tiles with headers that link to those 3 to 5 case studies. This is the minimum amount of work you need to showcase as a UX designer or researcher. And as you grow in your career, you can continue to update your homepage with the most relevant projects that you have and sort of hide the rest of your projects in a library if they're not as relevant. I would also say the homepage case study titles should be really intriguing or interesting. So think about clickbait, right? When we look at a New York Times article or we look at an article from The Atlantic, something that they say is very intriguing that makes us want to read the whole article or case study. A lot of times they put an impact metric or a big number to, show us the relevance or the importance of that article. So instead of describing your project as dog training app, that's not very exciting, or YouTube video animation, that's not very exciting to click into. So really take the time to think about what's a title that would really intrigue a user, and think about, generating almost like a New York Times header for your project. So it could be something like design systems refresh increases conversion rates by 20% across 10 million global users. Click to learn more. And I could have a subheader. That's exciting, right? I talk about the type of work I'm doing, which is a design systems refresh. I could even name drop the company if I don't need to be as confidential. So I could say something like design systems refresh for Marvel leads to a 20% conversion increase across 10 million users globally. And now I can name drop what I did, the design systems work, the name of the company, and the impact I had on the project. And that's something that somebody would want to click on. Again, your UX portfolio homepage case study images should also be relevant to the work. So don't just, showcase people talking. I want to see, if it's design systems work, showcase like a behind the scenes Figma file or design systems element that you've been working on. If you're working on a mobile app, show us a few key screens of the mobile app, but really make sure that everything about that tile is very relevant and very enticing for a recruiter or hiring manager to click into. And then you can also have an About Me page or section. What I like to do is combine them. So if this is the portfolio homepage, I like to have an About Me where you introduce yourself and a cover shot, and then you scroll down into the 3 to 5 case studies. But you can also have an About Me page. In the About Me page or the top of your UX portfolio homepage, you should be a little bit more personal about yourself. So this is not your resume. You can describe yourself in a more fun manner, maybe what some of your hobbies are, what you like to do outside of work, what are some unique traits that you bring to the table, and how can you describe that? I like to add a really short bio and profile picture. I like to showcase more of my personality, like hobbies, skill set, a few personal stories, maybe some mindsets, just to make it more interesting to read. It should still be short, but really get that across. So I could say something like, I like to be a startup hustler for large businesses and corporations like Disney, Hulu, Marvel. And so that could kind of showcase some of my personality. It's really important to link to your resume and LinkedIn profile in that About Me section. Make it really easy for your recruiter or hiring manager to LinkedIn stalk you, just like you're going to be stalking them on LinkedIn. And make sure all those deliverables are just readily available for them at the click of a button. And your About Me can also include some way for recruiters to contact you. So if you wanted, you could create some sort of form or lead generation tool, or even link to Calendly so that they can schedule something with you directly. And you can kind of add a description on what types of calls you're willing to take. And now this gets us to more of the UX case study template. So we've talked about, generally how to build a UX portfolio. We've talked about the homepage template, and now we're going to talk about the case study template in particular. So each UX portfolio case study you present should follow the same template, right? I don't want to see 5 different templates for 5 different projects, because then my mind has to work extra to figure out where everything is. If you have the same template across each of your projects, it makes it much easier for the recruiter to pick up on patterns and scan the entirety of your portfolio faster. So make sure that, for example, you're starting your template with, for example, an overview of the project and your role in the project, and then your design process, and then your research, and then your design. That could be a template. But just make sure that once you've chosen that template, you stick to it and remain consistent across all your projects. And your UX portfolio case study template should include that project overview. That project overview should talk about the purpose of the project, who you collaborated it with, what UX methodologies you used, and how long the project took, as well as key KPIs and impact metrics. And then you can add in those UX research and UX design sections within your case study. So really consider why this project is important from a stakeholder perspective when you're adding in those research and design sections. What are some key UX research insights that help shape the design process, or key UX research deliverables, whether that's, stakeholder maps, user types, journey maps, affinity clusters. From the design section perspective, is it user flows, wireframes, sketches, crazy eights, mid-fidelity to high-fidelity prototypes that you're highlighting? So really consider what are those deliverables and that you would like to showcase and how you're arranging them in the research versus design sections. And I'm not going to go into the details of each of these research or design sections. What I can really give you are elements that make a great case study. What I like to do is really make a video and put a video up top at the top of my portfolio. So a lot of times people don't like to read, right? Think about the last time you read an entire article from end to end. When was the last time you did that? Not many people today read an end-to-end article. Most people skim things. So I really like to make my headers do all the work in each of the sections. Think about when you're reading a BuzzFeed list or New York Times article. Those BuzzFeed lists really make sure that the headers are doing all the work, and they're really adding in a lot of video as well. So I recommend including a 5 to 10 minute video pitch in the overview section of your portfolio that is basically you just walking through your entire case study and really eloquently presenting and talking about your case study. This gives a hiring manager and a recruiter a sense of how you present and what your storytelling skill sets are like. And you can show off how you communicate about your designs, and they don't even have to read anything, right? I once had a hiring manager who told me that the reason I got selected for the job was because he basically just watched all my videos, and he's like, thank God I didn't have to read. Like, you were the one person whose portfolio I looked at where I just had to watch all your videos. And I loved watching the videos. I just watched all of them, and I was like, this is the girl I want to hire. So you never know, right? Going that extra mile of adding in that 5 to 10 minute video pitch could make or break your whether you land the job. Same thing with my job at Disney. I actually got hired, selected by my hiring manager at Disney because he watched one of my YouTube videos similar to the one that I'm doing, and he really liked it, and he reached out to me on LinkedIn, and we started a conversation. And so I basically skipped the whole job search process because I was building relationships. So really, don't underestimate the power of video. Everything is video nowadays. We're on TikTok, we're on Instagram. They're prioritizing video content. Your portfolio should be prioritizing video content as well. Once you have that video, you can now use like those New York Times and BuzzFeed style headers to really tell the story. Use bullet points to really be very concise about your storytelling, because I can guarantee you that nobody ever is going to read your entire case study. People just don't have the attention spans anymore, and they'd rather watch videos or they'd rather skim. And that's why we also need to make really great use of our before and after images, screens, visual deliverables, and really intersperse some of the descriptions we add with some of our visual deliverables, which we've already talked about, things like user types, personas, journey maps, blueprints, wireframes, and so on. So that is all about the portfolio. I will pause there before I move into the AI-powered job search section. All right. So I see, would you recommend a PDF portfolio? I've heard it helps expand on portfolio review presentation once we're along in the interview process. I don't have anything against a PDF portfolio. I just think that the website is the most streamlined way to do it. And it's just the easiest. A lot of the modern startups and companies don't even ask for a PDF. They'll just be like, link to your portfolio, and they expect the link. So that can tell you how, if modern startups and companies are, and they tend to be the ones most modern about their approach to recruiting, if that's the norm in startups, that's eventually going to be the norm in large corporates as well. I know large corporate application systems tend to have the put in your PDF. But I would say I'm thinking about the user experience from the recruiter or hiring manager perspective. And I know I just want to click a link and see 3 to 5 case studies. And if I have to scroll through a long PDF, that makes it harder for me to digest that information. And it's less of a great user experience, right? So I would hire the designer with the website over the designer with the PDF, but that's just me. There's different types of recruiters and hiring managers out there. So I won't say I'm against the PDF portfolio. I prefer the website portfolio. And, websites like Squarespace and Wix make it so accessible nowadays to create that portfolio. It's really a testament to your design skills that you have a portfolio up on a site. Would you recommend having multiple portfolios? This is a really great question. So I would recommend having multiple pages in your portfolio. Maybe you have one page, one landing page where you have a mix of research and design projects. Maybe you have another landing page with just your research projects and another landing page with just your design projects. So you can do something like that if you really want to, but honestly, I think that's overkill. I just recommend one simple homepage and one about me page and 3 to 5 case studies. I think you're almost getting into this space if you're overthinking your portfolio that you start just working. I've met so many career changers who do this. They'll just work on their portfolio and apply to no jobs. So I don't want you getting into that world where you're just constantly creating all these case studies but not really applying to the jobs. You need the bare bones portfolio you need is a website with a homepage and about me and 3 to 5 case studies. Creating your portfolio as a presentation. So again, the presentation portfolios are really more when you get to the interview stage, but when you're in the application phase, you want something to be easily scannable. What I have done is I will sometimes take my case studies, and once I get to the interview phase, I will turn it into a FigJam presentation, interactive FigJam activity presentation, or a FigJam presentation that people can interact with during the interview once I get to the interview phase. But when I'm just applying, I'm just worried about building a website. Yes, there will be a recording for this. I don't have a webinar on how to create video content for our portfolios, but that's what we focus on the 7-month design MBA. There's so many storytelling tactics that are required to create a video, and we really focus on, how to talk about more mid to senior level skill sets in the 7-month UX Design MBA. So how do you scope projects? How do you scope features? How do you go about product positioning, business strategy, building a business model, scoping your MVP, talking about the size of the market and your key differentiators. That's all elements of the story. And then everyone also has their own unique style, right? I don't want everyone to sound like a cookie cutter version of themselves or use a cookie cutter template. Everyone in our 7th-month design MBA program chooses their own unique project topics. And those topics are very relevant to who they are as people and what they're passionate about and what their expertise is. So it really takes a much more personalized approach when it comes to storytelling. And I have to work one-on-one with folks to give more information. What about for the hero section? What about the before and after animated video that talks about the process? Well, Christina, in some of the UX meetings that you're going to have to go through, you're going to have to be on camera presenting your work in Figma, and you're going to have to be on camera in a Zoom meeting or in person presenting your work in front of a whiteboard. So, that's really a lot of what we focus on in the 7-month UX Design MBA as well, is that storytelling and that comfort with telling a story, being authentic to who you are, and getting comfortable making a video pitch. That is actually a very intense moment for our cohort members, because during the midterms and finals, they have to present a 10-minute video pitch on camera, talking through their PowerPoint. And You might not be comfortable with it, but you are going to have to go through it when you go through the interviews, right? You're going to have your camera on when you talk to people in an interview. So this is almost like a dress rehearsal for that. So I would recommend getting comfortable being on camera. It's going to happen in the job, and then work your way into that comfort if you can. In terms of the portfolio design, what do you think is the right balance between creativity and readability? Again, I can't really say unless I see your portfolio. So if you have more questions about, balances between things, I can't really give a general answer. I have to look at your portfolio, and you can book a resume rewrite or portfolio rewrite with me. Would you recommend to have a portfolio website with a strong personal style, or a modern style is neutral style is better? I do advocate for showing your personality. Showing my personality is what got me hired at Disney, and showing my personalities on videos like this is what got me hired. So I advocate for showing your personality. I'm someone who uses bright colors. But those bright colors and personality should not get in the way of your professionalism and uh, a clean layout. So just because you use bright colors, that's great. That shows your style, but you should still have a clean portfolio layout. You should still, you can be funny in your videos, you can show your personality, you can even be a little bit out there in your video presentations, but you have to come back and be professional at the end of the day. So with that, I'm going to go into AI-powered job searches. We have about 15 minutes. I wanted to focus more on how we use AI first to begin with, because I think there's just a lot of content out in the world right now about prompts and how to use AI prompts. But really what I want you to get a feel for as you're doing an AI-powered job search is whether you are leaning towards algorithm aversion or algorithm over-reliance, because each of us have to find for ourselves a way to get to like a happy medium or a baseline that is not completely algorithm aversion, and it's not completely algorithm over reliance either. So algorithm aversion happens when we are distrustful of AI and AI capabilities, and we under rely on AI features to do the job. So then that drastically reduces our productivity in comparison to a person who's actually using AI. And like I mentioned, Shopify and Duolingo are actually actively evaluating candidates based on how well they use AI in their everyday tasks. So I am imagining a job search of the future, a UX job search of the future, will be where candidates are asked questions on how they use AI and how they what's their process with working with AI. Over-reliance happens when users become biased by the AI results and outputs, and they stop double-checking those outputs. They start using them blindly, and they drastically reduce their productivity or lower and produce lower quality work because they're using too much AI and they're over-dependent on AI in comparison to those users who are not using AI at all, or using AI in a more balanced manner. So as we go through this section, I really want you to think for yourself when you're using prompts for ChatGPT or Gemini. Are you someone who leans towards algorithm aversion, in which case you're not being as productive? Or are you someone who leans towards over-reliance, in which case you're blindly using AI outputs and you're not coming up with your own creative original work? And so again, we all have to find this balance for ourselves, right? And I really strongly encourage you to think about that. I'm going to show you my process, and I'm going to tell you that my process isn't perfect, but I also want to show you my process in resume writing prompts for resume writing, because I don't want you to rely on just my prompts, and I don't want you to rely on anybody else's prompts either. I think you should see all of our prompts as a starting point, and then you need to come up with your own process as a designer for how you use AI in your job search, because you need to be able to, in the future, in maybe a year or two, talk about how you use AI and how you avoid aversion or over-reliance on these AI algorithms. So I like to, I had mentioned earlier that I like to create a baseline resume, and then I like to tailor each resume to each job description that I apply to. And ChatGPT is the perfect person to help me do this, or perfect bot to help me do this. And so what I did was I created my first two prompts to kind of see if I could input some of the terminology from the job descriptions into my resume. So my first prompt is, if I give you a resume PDF and a job description, I would like you to rewrite the resume by adding in keywords and phrases from the job description. Can you do that? I have attached my resume. So I did that. It gave me a pretty good output, and it bolded some of the terms from the job description that it had added in. Then I tried something like 3 job descriptions because I wanted to just test how that would work. That didn't work as well. So I recommend sticking to 1 job description and 1 resume because it's just too many inputs for AI at this stage to really consider. And then I started to get more detailed because what I also started to realize was AI was taking away my high impact metrics when they were starting to add in my job description elements. So then I had to, talk again to them or prompt them again to really keep my key impact metrics. And so that was kind of some of the work I've been doing behind the scenes to come up with my own prompts and to kind of tailor resumes to really go into to really pass the ATS system, but with the help of ChatGPT. And I'm again trying to find my own balance on not over reliance and not algorithm aversion. I would say when I first started using AI, I was very much in the aversion mode, and I was like, AI can't do a good job. And then AI did a great job. And then I was like, okay, AI can do a great job, but like AI is missing all these things. So I always now go back over and double check to make sure that the storytelling comes across even after ChatGPT has added in all my key terms, because sometimes, and a lot of the times, the storytelling and the key impact metrics are lost when you over rely on ChatGPT. So it didn't necessarily streamline how fast I could apply to jobs. I still had to spend a lot of time correcting ChatGPT's work. But it did, save me, I would say, maybe 5 or 10 minutes. So again, I had to get to that my own balance between over reliance and aversion. Over reliance would have been if I had just taken this resume and used it and applied to the job without editing it to re-add back in some of my own unique storytelling elements. And so that's why I just want you to be cautious. I'm going to give you some AI job starter prompts that I have seen on the internet and social media. But I think the biggest thing, if you can take away from this, is to really find that balance for yourself between over reliance and aversion, and to keep pressure testing these prompts, right? You saw that I was pressure testing them in multiple ways. And it's really this process that's going to be fun and exciting to explain when you're in a UX job interview, to showcase your process as a designer. So that's another thing we do in the 7-month UX Design MBA, is that everyone works on their own project topics. Everyone's building a startup of their own. It is your unique IP. You're coming up with your own unique way of thinking when you're working on your project. Yes, we're all using the same design process, but again, everyone's also building AI features because we've added in a 3-hour lecture on AI product design to our curriculum. And everyone has to learn to think for themselves and be able to build something unique and differentiated and showcase their unique way of thinking and their unique brand as a designer or a researcher when they're going for jobs. And so that's why I'm also trying to encourage you right now to come up with your own unique way of using ChatGPT, just like how we all apply the design process in our own unique ways. So when I show you some of these prompts, yes, these are a good starting point, but I wouldn't rely on them. I would, again, think of your baseline between aversion and over-reliance. So here's an ATS-friendly resume prompt. Make my resume pass through top ATS systems for a role. Put the most important sections first on hiring impact. Add a keyword match list and format check for different file types. Give my resume an interview chance rating. So use it how you will. Change my work history into powerful star achievement bullets. Show the before and after impact of my work. Add numbers for money saved, efficiency gained, and team size. I really like this part of the prompt. Rate how memorable each bullet will be to the hiring managers. That's okay. I don't think I would add that. Put numbers behind my work accomplishments. I really like that. Create clear statements showing money impact, time saved, and team growth. Compare my results to industry standards. So again, I really encourage you to find more of these prompts, but really the biggest learning is to come up with your own balance between over-reliance and aversion and how you use AI. And I think that should be the focus. Career changer resumes. So here it's more about how to talk about those transferable skills. And then there's also some tips on LinkedIn as well. So provide tips on how to use LinkedIn for networking, and how to write, the target LinkedIn message. Again, I would not over rely on just the ChatGPT or AI output, but I would personalize it because AI doesn't have feelings, right? AI cannot personalize it and tell a story that you can, or a unique story like you can. And then AI could also be a great tool for interviews, especially when you're at those initial ideation phases of interviews where, you're talking about like, what are the top 20 questions? How can I craft some of my answers? But again, I would not rely on just focusing on what the AI says. I think it's a good starting point, and then you have to do a lot of editing if you want to be true to telling a unique story about yourself. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. What's our story at UX Woman? In case you didn't know, my name is Sumaya. I'm the founder at UX Woman. I have about 9 years of experience across startups, consulting corporate, working for brands like Disney, Hulu, Marvel, and all those big brand names. My early career was pretty chaotic. I started in mechanical engineering at Carnegie Mellon, did some AI coding as well, moved into my first job as a customer success manager for an ed tech startup, met my co-founder, we created Ideate Labs together. In my early career, I got my first UX research job, but something was still missing because I didn't fully understand business strategy at that point, and I was so focused on design. So I went back to Wharton, I went to UPenn, the Wharton School, I went to the engineering school and the design school as well. It was an interdisciplinary program, and that's where things for me really started to click. So at that stage, at this point, I was in grad school. I had had a failed startup before I went to grad school. I was failing at a startup during grad school. It was like a pet Tinder app, which didn't go anywhere. But as I was finishing up grad school, I realized that maybe that first trajectory, I thought I had wanted to be a manager and work my way up corporate. But I realized that was not really what I wanted to do. I'm more of a startup person. I am more casual. So I wanted to be more of an entrepreneur instead. Weirdly, I ended up doing both after grad school. So I landed my first UX management job full time after grad school. And then I co-founded Ideate Labs, which was our first successful business, right? So it was our third attempt that finally got us some success. We grew Ideate Labs to 50,000 learners. And then last year, my co-founder and I split ways. And then I also landed a job full-time at Disney, and I worked there for about a year and a half building inclusive design curriculum, because my manager found me on YouTube, so he really liked this kind of learning and style. And then I realized I wanted to get closer to my values, especially now with the state of the world we live in. So I founded UX Woman based on my commitment to helping women, immigrants, the LGBTQ communities, and people of color break into tech. So that is our goal and mission at UX Woman. I hope that you enjoyed this presentation and that you found it valuable. I will see if there's any more questions at this stage in the last 5 minutes. Using AI for resumes, it's helpful to usually understand how it works. I usually ask ChatGPT to pull keywords that a hiring manager or recruiter would look for, but I go back and look because it sometimes misses words. Yes, so true. Don't don't use the AI during the interview. Yep. There's a lot of crazy stories about AI right now. So yeah, I think with AI, we're all learning together. And I think it's more about how we learn to use AI and how we learn to ethically not over rely on it, especially when we're seeing a lot of these CEOs over rely on it, right? I think it's interesting about like hiring decisions on Duolingo and Shopify. But I wonder if like CEOs and executives are biased towards over-reliance because they just want to cut costs and consider their bottom line. Which is, we'll see. We'll see. That's all I have to say. All right. Thank you so much for joining. And I hope to see you in another presentation. Awesome. Good luck with the job search.